Welcome back to the show. Today, we're talking about your biological age. Specifically, we're talking about your immune age, and we're doing that by looking at a really interesting molecule on your blood cells called a glycan. My guest today is Dr. Gordon Lauc. He is the world-leading expert on this very subject. He's published over 100 research papers, published in international journals, and he is the holder of 6 patents. This man knows of what he speaks. The cool thing about your GlycanAge is that it is very reflective of inflammation in your body, and it can be reversed relatively quickly with some lifestyle changes. So this is a really interesting topic. We're always interested in our biological age. Are we aging faster or more slowly? So this episode holds one of the keys to making sure that we slow down our aging. If you want to learn more about glycans and the test, then you can go to glycanage.com. If you decide that you want to buy the test, you can use the link bit.ly/nat15glycan and discount code superhuman2020. This obviously will be in the show notes below, so you don't have to scramble to write it down here. And you know where to find me, natnidham.com. And if you love this episode and you get value from it and you know people, other people who will, then by all means, please share it out with your friends, your networks, whatever it is. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome, Dr. Lauc, to the podcast. It is such a pleasure to meet you today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, well, the honor is mine. So as people know, we're going to be talking about glycans today and the GlycanAge test as a measure of, as a measure of biological aging, but I find the term biological aging actually really interesting. So I'd love to talk to you about that at some point. But before we do that, why glycans? What drove you? You've been at this game for a while now. What led you down this particular path of glycans that is so specific?
So I started working on glycans actually 30 years ago. So it's very hard to be specific why exactly I started it. But I remember once when I was doing my PhD, my boss came to me with a very brand new diagnostic kit for glycans, say, let's look at glycans. This is something very new and fancy 30 years ago. And then when I started looking at glycans, I noticed something what we know now, and this is that the glycans are everywhere. They're involved in all biological processes, and majority of people ignore them. So there's nothing so special about glycans. There are genes, there are proteins, there are lipids, and there are glycans. And they are one of the 4 key components of life. But what is special about glycans is that so many people ignore them. And this is why I keep pushing everybody to look at glycans, because they're just part of the big picture, which is missing. Mm-hmm. And what we are trying in my lab, and my lab is the largest in the world for glycan profiling, we try to add this glycan information to everything else what people are doing, including aging and biological age.
Yeah, okay. And so what are glycans? Because, people say, oh, they're sugar molecules. Well, what does that mean?
So chemically, they are carbohydrates.
Yeah.
But in evolution, they got the role of modifying protein function.
Okay.
And we know proteins are directly encoded in a gene. And the E. coli has 5,000 genes. We have around 20,000 genes.
Not that much
and
more.
we are not only 4 times more complicated than the simple bacteria.
No.
We are thousands or millions times more complicated. And one of the ways how we became so complicated was by regulating genes through epigenetics and by modulating proteins with the different post-translational modifications like phosphorylation, but the most diverse one is glycosylation. So I usually make an analogy like, proteins are molecular robots. And the polypeptide part is just the simplest version of it. So if you think about a car, polypeptide would have one seat and a wheel and wheels and the steering wheel and an engine. This would be a polypeptide. If you want to have anything else, like the windshield, the windows, the rear view mirrors, the air conditioning, anything else.
Yeah.
Anything, any fine tuning, these would be the glycans. So glycans regulate, do the fine tuning of nearly all proteins. For example, if we talk about antibodies, immunoglobulins, which are our main weapon to fight all the foreign invaders. Antibodies, when they're made, they do not know what will the invader be. And the invader could be a virus, could be bacteria, or could be the food we are eating.
Correct.
And depending on what foreign molecules come into your body, you have to have a very different reaction. To viruses, you will activate one branch of the immune system. To bacteria, it will be a different branch. And to food, you just want to ignore it. And the decision what to do with your antibodies is largely done by glycans. So by putting different glycans, you direct antibodies in a different direction. And this is the case for many different proteins.
So the glycosylation happens of the immune cells at what stage? Later on, or when it like? So I guess you have an immature, you have an immune cell that's non-specific, and then does the glycosylation happen at the time of need, infection, or does it happen further down the process?
It happens, so it can change.
Okay.
So through time, the same polypeptide part of antibody can get a different glycosylation as the immune system makes a decision. So the clone of B cells, which are producing specific antibodies, can get different signals and then change glycosylation. And actually, recently, we even learned that even after the antibody is produced and secreted from the B cell, when it's circulating in the body, again, you can change its glycosylation if you get a signal that the glycosylation should be modified.
That's
because so it's this is really an addition to the basic gene makes a protein, and then there is this fine tuning of glycans, for which we have a number of strong policy documents, both in Europe and US, saying that glycans are important in all major diseases, and we have to include glycans to actually understand what is going on. You know, even blood groups are glycans. ABO blood groups, chemically, they're glycans. So many things are glycans, just people didn't have analytical capacity to look at individual structures. These tools we have for maybe 15 to 20 years, no more.
Okay, that's so interesting. That's such an elegant sophistication to the system, right? To the immune system, that it can then modify on the fly. I feel like there's so little that people understand, and we don't appreciate it sometimes. You know, people think of it very linearly, and it's so much more sophisticated. So the GlycanAge test is a way to interpret the glycans on the IgG molecule, right? Which is sorry.
The GlycanAge test is actually the ultimate simplification of the IgG glycom composition. IgG glycans and immunoglobulins do many different roles. And one of the things we learned is that they also change with age. And we did over 100,000 people. We analyzed immunoglobulin glycans in over 100,000 people in different diseases, in different epidemiological cohorts. And we realized that both our scientists, the colleagues that we were working with, and especially the common people, they have really troubles understanding individual glycan structures. So this is not something which is, you can go to a person and say, oh, this is corfucose, this is bisecting GlycanAge, or this is galactose. They
you just changed languages on us, yes.
Yes. So then we said, okay, what is the best way to kind of simplify information for people? And this is how the GlycanAge was born. We learned that glycans change a lot with age, and they strongly correlate with age. And actually, the GlycanAge clock was published on the very same day when the Steve published his epigenetic clock on the
Horvath clock. Yeah.
Yeah. It was on I think December 10th, 2013, 9 years ago, a little more than 9 years ago. But since glycans are not so easy to analyze, not so many people looked at it. So now many more people know about the epigenetic age than the GlycanAge. And when we published the GlycanAge, we noticed that the average difference, median difference between the GlycanAge and chronological age is 9 years. While in the large cohorts for epigenetic aging, it would be only approximately a year.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually advantage of the GlycanAge compared to epigenetic age, because the difference between the chronological age and the GlycanAge is lifestyle. Because whatever you do in your life, your epigenetic age will go in a very similar way. You can lose 20 kilos and epigenetic age will not change much.
Right.
If you lose excess weight, your GlycanAge will improve. If you decrease the level of stress, your GlycanAge will improve. So GlycanAge is something which is defined partly by genes. Of course, there's always a genetic component, maybe around 30% is genetic. By your chronological age, this is a strong factor, but also with your lifestyle. So what we learned by looking into so many people is that people who live healthier have a lower GlycanAge than people who live an unhealthy lifestyle. And what is even more important, people who will develop different diseases linked to inflammation, so all the cardiometabolic diseases, inflammatory diseases, they nearly always, or at least they strongly correlate with increased GlycanAge.
And so, is it at the time of the disease development, or does it show up earlier? I thought I read somewhere that the glycans start to, because we talk about disease develops over years and decades. It doesn't happen overnight. You don't become diabetic.
These type of studies are extremely difficult to do.
Sure.
To have samples of people before they got ill.
Yeah.
So for now, we know that in arthritis, in inflammatory bowel disease, in cardiovascular diseases, and in diabetes, glycans change before the disease is diagnosed. So I don't know for other diseases because we did not look.
Okay.
But what we know that glycans are not only biomarkers, they're molecules which regulate low-grade chronic inflammation.
Okay.
And even in one example, it was actually on an animal model, but we were able to prevent or to protect obese mice from hypertension by improving glycans. So we had mice, if you put mice on a high-fat diet, they become obese, they develop hypertension. And if you feed mice with a dietary supplement which can improve IgG glycosylation, make them younger, they do become obese, but they do not develop hypertension. This was published in Circulation 2 years ago. It was a really large study together with the colleagues at UT Southwestern.
Yeah.
So we know that at least for cardiovascular diseases and for inflammation, if you improve glycans, you will decrease the risk of disease, you will decrease inflammation. So what we believe is that glycans are not only biomarkers, they're very early on the path to disease, because disease is an endpoint. This is not something which happens in a day.
No.
Disease is a moment when we feel that something is wrong, we ask for help, and then we got a name. And the names of diseases are historical. They're based on some studies done 100 years ago when a physician noticed a symptom on a specific location and gave it a name arthritis, it's inflammation in the joints, or Crohn's disease, inflammation in the gut, while molecular mechanisms leading to them are often very similar. And we believe these glycans attached to IgG are one of the molecular mechanisms. So indeed, you can see these changes up to a decade before people become ill. And what we hope is that by improving glycans, you can actually postpone disease development.
Right.
Because one of the biggest problems we have, everybody has, is that we more or less know what is healthy, but we don't do it. We don't do it because it is difficult. It's difficult to exercise. It's difficult to skip that extra cookie which is in front of you. It's difficult not to be under stress. And we always think, you know, I'll take care of that tomorrow.
Yes, that's human nature. Yeah.
Next Monday. And because the feedback comes in 10, 20, 30 years. Diseases will develop in 20 years because of what we are doing today, but we don't see that. And then we are not motivated to change. And one of the ways we try to position GlycanAge is that this is giving you information, insight of what is going on a molecular level. And contrary to some other aging clocks, this is not only a biomarker, which nobody knows what it actually does. It's a molecule for which we know that it is causing the damage. And if you improve GlycanAge, you know that you have decreased low-grade chronic inflammation. And we know that low-grade chronic inflammation is causing diseases. And you don't have to wait for 20 years to see that. You can wait for a couple of months, do another test and see whether what you are trying is working or not.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to go back to the mouse study quickly, just because you said the mice were obese and you gave them something to improve the glycans. They remained obese, but they didn't develop hypertension. What did you give them?
It was N-acetylmanosamine. It's a pre-manosamine. It's not commercially available.
Okay.
There was only one small trial on NIH on humans, and it is safe. Humans can take it. The problem is that the cost at the moment is prohibitive of any human clinical trial.
Okay.
You know, for mice, you can buy enough to feed a mouse, but you cannot buy enough of the supplement to have a trial on human. I hope with time this will change, because it's very similar molecule to N-acetylglucosamine, which is available everywhere for a reasonable price. This is N-acetylglucosamine, and the other one is N-acetylmanosamine.
Right.
And N-acetylmanosamine is a precursor for salicylic acid, which is one of these glycans, one of these carbohydrates, which makes glycans on IgG younger.
Right.
So at the moment, there's nothing we could do. I would be the first one to try it, but it's not available, and eventually it will become.
But the alternative is, for people who don't have access to this molecule, is to address the obesity, which itself will address the glycan.
Yes, this is something that we have very clearly shown. And for example, if people undergo bariatric surgery, which is drastic, but it's also reducing weight for 20, 30 kilos. We had a patient who got 35 years younger in 6 months.
Just from, which is interesting because
just by removing, by not being obese anymore. Of course, not everybody improved that much, but we also did another interesting study. We were looking at twins together with Tim Spector in King's College London, 2,000 twins in 3 time points over 15 to 20 years. So he was sampling them every 7 to 8 years. We had 2,000 of them in 3 time points. And during this follow-up time, some of the twins were gaining weight, some of the twins had the same weight, and some of the twins were losing weight. And those who were actually gaining weight, they were aging much faster than those who were not gaining weight. And those who were losing weight were sometimes even going in the opposite direction. So definitely obesity is one of the main drivers behind the inflammation in general, but also this IgG glycosylation, which is promoting inflammation.
Well, which is interesting, right? And I was reading one of the papers, and they were talking about BMI, and I'm like, oh, BMI is such bunk, right? Because it doesn't distinguish between the power lifter and the obese person. But then later on, they talk about, well, what we really looked at was hip to waist ratio, and I think it was waist to height ratio, which now is looking for central adiposity. And that's where, and in the end, I think what they were talking about is it's that gut fat that really is the driver. Yeah. And we know that it's the driver of inflammation, and that's the one that it impacts.
Yeah, I agree completely. So comparing the BMI between different people, it's meaningless.
Yeah.
But looking at just the weight or the BMI of the same individual,
right,
it's very informative, because very rarely will somebody build up 10, 15 kilos of muscles in their middle age. This happens very rarely.
Yeah, so if you happens, but no, it's not common.
Yeah, but it's very rarely. So maybe among 2,000 people, you will have maybe one or two who did something like that.
Sure.
So and this is why in our research, we are more and more trying to move away from cross-sectional studies, where we are comparing different people, into the longitudinal intervention studies, where we are looking at changes within a person.
Yeah.
Because we are all very different. There is no standard human. For example, we did a trial of 1,000 people on 5 different diets for a year. So we were tracking.
Yeah.
We were tracking people for a year on 5 different diets, so initially they had a low-calorie diet. So they had just a low calorie, and then they were put on one of the 5 different diets. So when they were on a low-calorie diet, glycans improved for all of them. So weight loss universally works. But when they were put on a different diet, on each of the diets, even the high glycemic index diet, some of the people got better and some of the people got worse.
Interesting.
And also I know many people now use those continuous glucose monitors. And we know that there are some people who will not have a glucose spikes even after a cake.
Yeah.
Eat a cake, and there is no glucose spike, while the other people, their glucose would explode.
Yeah.
So we are all different. We cannot give a universal advice to anybody, because there is no standard human. That thing does not exist. It's an average of all of us. And with the idea of GlycanAge is that you can try something and see whether it works for you.
Yeah, no, I think that application alone of GlycanAge is brilliant, because that, as I started off as a nutritionist, and, after a while I was like, okay, like there's no straight answer. I've always believed that it's a personalized diet, and we can look at genetics for some guidance, but even then it's not exact. But the idea that you can change your diet and commit to it. And what I love about the glycans, or what I've seen, is you don't have to wait a year to see the results. Like, I believe it's within 3 months or so, you can start to see a shift in the response of the glycans to a specific diet. Is that true, or did I misread that?
It depends what you do.
Okay.
So, because we measure glycans and immunoglobulins. Immunoglobulins have a half-life of approximately 3 weeks.
Okay.
So it does take some time for these molecules to change.
Sure.
And for example, if there is kind of a drug intervention, if you introduce hormones, then things can change relatively quickly, because immediately you have changed conditions. If you just change a diet, then it will take a couple of weeks for conditions in the body to change, to start producing the new molecules. So for diet, we usually have to wait 3 or 4 months to see an effect.
Yeah.
And for some very acute things, it could be a matter of weeks. But yes, for kind of a reasonable interventions, which people do because they decide to do it, it would be 3 to 4 months, and then you see the first effects. and then you do additional of 3 to 4 months, and then you are sure that it goes in one of the directions. So
yeah, I mean, that's, for, again, like in coaching people, that's a much easier sell than we have to wait a year, right? Like,
no,
I
of
think
course.
3 months, like do this for 3 months. I promise you all the foods you're eating new foods now. There's foods you're not eating. All those foods will still be there. Like, no fear.
I agree.
They will still be there in 3 months. But for people to get that feedback, that very direct feedback that says what you've done, and like, I see this like with the keto diet, like people are so emotionally invested. It becomes a philosophy. It becomes emotional more than anything. And even though they're more inflamed and they're a bit more fat, they're beating themselves up. I think I'm not doing it right. To have this very meaningful metric in a comparatively reasonable amount of time.
Yep.
And then it encourages them to either keep going or we try something new.
Yep. So we have very good experience with some of the anti-aging clinics all around the world, where patients are becoming really younger in a couple of months on therapy. And then everybody is happy.
Yeah.
The doctor is happy because the patient is happy, and the patient is happy because things are improving. What we have problem with is that, in this field of anti-aging and nutrition, there are so many people selling snake oil.
Yeah.
And they are not happy because
then you can't make everybody happy all the time.
So so I think, this is one of the ways to distinguish whether what you are doing is actually helping people, or you're just trying to take their money and pretend that you're actually doing something.
Yeah.
And this is particularly the sensitive field for us was gyms.
Sorry,
because
gyms?
they're gyms, different gyms.
Yeah.
Physical activity, because so many of them actually overtrain people.
Sure.
Especially if we go in a population of middle-aged people.
Yeah.
So people in their, 40s or 50s, they decide to become physically active because they start thinking about it, and then go to gym and virtually kill themselves in a gym.
Yeah.
With a personal trainer who is pushing them over the limit, and they all get worse.
Sure.
Because too much physical exercise is pro-inflammatory.
Sure.
It's not good because, just think about the professional athletes. They're old, in their early 30s.
Absolutely.
Say, this guy is old, he's 34. Come on, these are still babies in their 30s.
But I love that you say that, because people look at competitive athletes as these paragons of health. And frankly, most of the time, they're like a house on fire. I mean, they're physically fit. They're incredibly gifted. They work so hard. But I think even in the, when you look at the Horvath clock, very often these people are aging way faster than anybody else.
It's just consuming the body. Our body is a limited resource. You cannot do unlimited training. And it's okay, if you are kind of a top professional athlete and then you make many millions in the first decade, and then you can go and live an easy life and repair all the damage.
Yeah.
But, if you are just a middle-aged average guy who tries to be a little bit healthier, then you have to have a reasonable coach which will balance physical activity with relaxation, with stretching, with everything else which is needed to keep your body healthy. And this is where we had a lot of problems with GlycanAge, because all of these guys are actually convinced that everybody will be better if they just push them strong enough, and they were actually getting worse.
Yeah, I think you'd have a really good time in a CrossFit gym. I don't know if you've looked at any CrossFit gyms, but I gave up on CrossFit when I just realized, all I'm doing is spending a lot of money with my chiropractor, and nothing against CrossFit. It's a beautiful community. It's a great workout. It makes you feel good, but very often it just breaks you. And it drives up that inflammation. I remember going to my doctor once and getting just regular blood work done, and she looked at my high sensitivity CRP, she goes, oh my God, Nat, it's off the charts. Oh, but you're doing those crazy workouts, right? I'm like,
Yeah. Yep, I agree.
and so she just kind of went, all right. But I've learned that for me, I need a day of recovery between each hard workout. And if I give myself that day and I do smart things like whether it's red light or sauna or whatever, yoga, whatever, then I don't get injured. And for me, that's my feedback. If I'm injury free, then I'm doing something right. So again, I mean, like the magic of these glycans is how we can influence them and the feedback that we get from them. Like to me, like that's just, it's an amazing thing. Now, have you looked at them also? And maybe you have, but there's just so many. Have you looked at glycans in response to some of these longevity supplements that people are selling? And I believe this is where you're talking a little bit about snake oil, right? Like,
yeah, no, I'm extremely cautious in that respect, because we have, I call it the nightmare story with statins.
Oh, interesting.
So we did a large cohort of people
Mm-hmm.
and not on statins, and we saw a very strong effect of statins. Then we looked for another large cohort, and then perfectly replicated what we have seen. And we have nearly published a paper saying that the statins strongly affect IgG glycosylation. But then we got a cohort from a proper placebo-controlled randomized trial. And then the effect of statins was zero.
In terms of affecting GlycanAge?
On glycans. They do not affect the glycans. So we have two large cohorts, maybe over 5,000 people, showing there is a very strong correlation between people taking statins and changes in glycans. And then on a randomized placebo-controlled trial, we found that statins do not have any effect. What was caused of that is that people were given statins because of their health conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So the results we got was actually confounded by the reason people take statins. So whenever people start taking any supplement, in particular, if this is a very expensive, fancy new supplement, in addition to taking a supplement, they will also start thinking more what they eat, thinking more about their exercise, and maybe it will be something else, which is actually changing glycans, not a supplement. So we have done a couple of trials, even some completely crazy trials, showing that some things which simply cannot work. Now, there's no biological logic they could work. And they seemed to work. But then when we dig deeper, okay, did you do anything else besides taking it? Oh yeah, I was checking my diet, I was exercising regularly. So to have any really reliable data on all those supplements, we need a placebo-controlled trial.
Right.
And this is not easy to organize.
No.
So this is why I'm very cautious in making any claims. Yes, we have seen people improve on various different supplements, but whether this is, I don't know, NMN or rapamycin or whatever, we cannot claim at the moment. Right. Because we need to do proper science before we're able to say it.
Got it. No, that makes total sense. And then, I mean, it's the beauty and the curse of the glycans, right? They're so influenceable by lifestyle changes that anything, right? So the top lifestyle changes, just to review right now, is changing your nutrition. And I mean, improving it is going to for sure do better. And I think, you know what, in preparing for this, I listened to another podcast that your daughter recorded with someone I think it was Boomer Anderson. And they talk about a group of, I think they were software engineers, where they measured their glycans. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because it's a really fun study. It's as close to a controlled intervention as you can get, because they were so bad.
I'm laughing because this was my son's company.
Oh, you're kidding.
My brother's company. He has an IT company, maybe 20 people there, and all young people, all these crazy computer geeks living unhealthy life, and they were horrible.
Yeah.
They're all horrible. And nowadays, now, they have fresh fruit and vegetable delivery in a company regularly from the local farms and so on. And they actually, they got better because, I'm 51, so I'm already a little bit old. So I treat everybody below 30 as kids because they're younger than kids. But even those kids can have very unhealthy life and have very unhealthy life habits.
Yeah.
So we see these effects in glycans, even in young children, the unhealthy life. Primarily, it's obesity and all the junk food which people eat. And I think the junk food primarily works through the microbiome.
Yeah.
Because the problem with the junk food is it's all full of different preservatives, which make it last forever. And it makes them last forever because they kill bacteria. Yeah. And when you eat that, then you kill bacteria in your gut. And we need our microbiome to remain healthy. So by eating all this ultra-processed food, it's not that the food is doing the damage. If it's a carbohydrate, it's a carbohydrate. But all these additives which are being added to keep it on a shelf for a long time. And that's primarily an American problem. In US, you have so much of this ultra-processed food which people eat. Europe doesn't eat that much junk. And then you kill your bacteria. And when you don't have your bacteria, then you have also more inflammation in the gut, and it's changing your glycans. So yes, this was an interesting story. Kids, software engineers, all being horrible, improving diet, everybody getting better.
Yeah. Well, and when you say horrible, I'll just quickly tell the listeners what horrible was. And these guys were really, they were really pushing it, right? It was, I think she said it was cereal for breakfast, cereal for lunch, and then beer for with dinner every day. And it was a culture. And then they would make this thing called a salad, which was chips and popcorn and leftover takeout. They lived on takeout, cereal, and beer, basically. But what was amazing is, I guess you brought in a nutritionist thinking, my son's too young to die. I need to help him. and they were open to the change. And to me, this is such an amazing thing about this test, because even though it's not like they went from that crazy, horrible diet to a perfect, angel singing diet, they just made some improvements, right? They added some fruit, they added a little vegetable, maybe they took away a couple of the worst offenders, and they all saw an improvement. And to this day, as you say, they're still getting it gave them the encouragement to make the improvements and to kind of keep them. I'm sure they still drink beer and eat cereal.
But it was not me.
No,
my son and those kids would not listen to me.
Of course not. Yeah,
it was Nicolina, who is the big sister, who persuaded them to change. So it's the thing is, young people don't listen to old people, and everybody older more than 10 years than they're old. Mm-hmm. So it came from their generation saying, I have this cool test which we are doing. Let's see how you look like. Oh, guys, you're all horrible. What could be the reason? Oh gosh, this is what you eat. And then
right
what you said.
Anyway, I just think that's a great story, because it gives a really good snapshot. It also makes the case, to your point, that you don't have to, it's not only 40, 50, 60, 70-year-olds. You can even be creating a metabolic disaster in your 20s or even younger than that. And, and again, mentioning the microbiome is another really interesting, because the microbiome is it's like another galaxy, right? We know this much about it. We have a sense of what makes it better. We have a sense of what really makes it bad, but we don't it's like the diet. There's no perfect microbiome. We don't know what it really takes. We don't know what that unicorn microbiome is, but that the microbiome should have an influence on the glycans as well is another arrow in the direction of how important these compounds are. And
it's actually bidirectional communication, because we evolved together with our microbes. Mm-hmm. So people in the lab try to make a mouse without any microbes in the gut. They don't survive, they die. So we cannot live without microbes in our our guts because we evolved with them.
Yeah.
And the problem is what happened with the modern diet. First, all these preservatives, but the second thing is we eat all the time.
Yeah,
this was not normal. This never happened before.
Yeah.
And when we eat all the time, when I say never happened, meant in evolution.
Yeah.
And when we eat all the time, then our guts are always filled with this soup of nutrients. And then all the aggressive bacteria can compete. And the only thing these bacteria need to do is to multiply and kill other bacteria. And we cause so many different problems by just having all this food in our guts all the time. While when there is no food in our guts, bacteria, which we like, they're actually grazing on glycans on our epithelia, this mucosal barrier, this glycocalyx. This is actually the food for our microbes, which we presented. So in a way, we domesticated cattle and the sheep and the chicken and whatever, and we feed them, so they give us back the benefit. In the same way, we domesticated some of the bacteria. We feed them with our gut glycan. But they have advantage only when there is no food in our guts. So this intermittent fasting, one of the ways how intermittent fasting works is you just get everything out. So these bad guys who are just the aggressive bully bacteria, they don't have a competitive edge. And these good domesticated bacteria with just little grazing on our glycan, they thrive. And then they protect us from a bad bacteria.
Yeah, no, that's such a powerful point. And so have you done a study on people who fast and people who don't fast, or is it again one of those ones where there's so many confounders that it's
we don't have the intermittent fasting diet, we don't have that, but we have studies of microbiome transplant. There is a fecal microbiome transplant studies, and we did a couple of them. And if you change your microbes by microbiome transplant, then yes, also your glycans will change. So you can see improvement in the glycan by improving the microbiome.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so I know we want to kind of stay within an hour, and there's one other very big topic that I want to make sure we touch on, and that's hormones, because that the role of estrogens, and I think it's estradiol in particular, in people's aging process or on their glycans is really amazing. And it doesn't just affect women, it affects men as well. So we did a number of studies in that direction. So initially we did a proper placebo-controlled randomized trial of sex hormones. So there was a group of young men and women where their gonadal hormones were chemically blocked. So they got an injection for the induction of complete blockade of the gonadal hormones. So within a month, they came to the post-menopausal level for women and no testosterone for men. And then part of the group received the hormone supplementation. They had the estrogen patch. The other half had the placebo. And the same for men, either testosterone or placebo. A little bit more complicated, I come back to that. And women who were their estrogen was depleted, they aged on average 30%. So approximately 9 years in 6 months. Yeah.
So really rapid glycan aging, while those who had the estrogen replacement, they did not. So they stayed on the normal level. Once this chemical blockade of the normal gonadal hormones washed out, they all returned to the normal level. So we showed on a very exact randomized placebo-controlled trial that estrogen regulates IgG glycan. And we had also another large study. Oh, let me say the men also. Yeah. So for men, the supplementation was testosterone. So if you get rid of testosterone, you get older. If you give back testosterone, you do not get older. But interestingly, if you use aromatase inhibitors,
Yes.
So those molecules which prevent conversion of testosterone to estrogen. And many people do that because they want to have high testosterone.
Yeah.
If you block aromatase, then your GlycanAge goes up. It's actually estrogen in men, which is also controlling the glycosylation. So yes, you give testosterone to men, but you have to allow it to convert to estrogen.
Or at least some. Yeah.
At least some. Yeah. Well, it's a biological process. You just don't block it.
Yeah.
And then it's okay. And so the study we did, we published it recently, actually a little bit earlier this year. We had 2,000 twins followed for 15 to 20 years in 3 time points. And many of them in this period went through perimenopause and entered menopause. So we had women in 3 time points, regular cycle, menopause, or regular cycle, menopause, regular cycle. So we always had a period of perimenopause, so the period when the transition happened, and either period before or after. And in this period, when I say period, I mean a time frame. So in the time frame when women converted from the regular cycle to menopause, the aging was several times faster than in either of the other ends. So around the perimenopause period, there's a rapid aging of women. And we've seen, I call them horror stories of young women having perfect GlycanAge in their, so they would be in their early 40s, GlycanAge would be in the 20s, early 30s, and then immediately they exploded for 10, 15, 20 years. And they would freak out, of course, because what happened? Why am I aging so rapidly? I was so good and now I'm old. And it was actually estrogen depletion. But the problem with the perimenopause period is that estrogen go up and down like crazy. Yeah. It can be very high for a short period and go very low and so on. So if you just measure it, you would have to measure it day by day for weeks to see what is actually changing. So, and the GlycanAge is actually the early indicator that something is going on. Because if you remember, I mentioned that the GlycanAge is based on a glycans immunoglobulin G, which has a half-life of 3 weeks. Right. So it is actually integrating estrogen concentration in the last few weeks. Yeah. So by measuring glycans on IgG, you see the average hormone concentration in the last few weeks.
So it's a short period, it's a short window of time, really, that you're looking at.
Actually, it's a long window of time. Because if you take hormone level, it's just today.
In that moment, yeah, for sure.
If you take glycans, it's the hormone levels in the last few weeks. Yeah. So it's like kind of a repeated measuring of the hormones. And then we see very quickly when this level starts going down, you can't see it with the hormones, it's going up and down, but on the glycans you see. And when women get their hormones back, if they take HRT, then the GlycanAge goes back again. So this is still not being used routinely in the clinics because, of course, this is not a diagnostic test. Yeah. For something to become a diagnostic test, it takes a lot of studies, a lot of validation, accreditation, and so on. But good thing is that the GlycanAge is on the market as a lifestyle test. Yeah. In principle, you can do the test, send it to your menopause physician, and then they can give an interpretation. And we are currently doing a couple of trials in Europe to show how really predictive it is. Will it help us say, you still have a regular cycle, but maybe your hormones are going down. Yeah. Can we supplement it a bit? Should we take it later? There are a lot of things we need to learn, but definitely this can be an early indicator what is going on, because you know that one of the key problems of perimenopause is that you cannot diagnose it, and the symptoms start to appear. So then women get diagnosed with depression, fibromyalgia, or whatever. They get treated And they get completely wrongly treated because this is not the problem. Problem is hormone deficiency, which was not diagnosed.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, for sure. Now, let me ask you a question. So for women, so perimenopause is the storm, right? It's the storm. What happens for women when they get to menopause? They get through the storm, they get to this new place called menopause. And for the women who won't do BHRT for whatever reason, have you looked at, or have you seen that rate of aging level off at all? Or does it just stay because they just won't have the estrogen?
So the rate of aging decreases, but they stay old.
But they stay old. Okay, so there's no recovery.
So they're not getting older, but they are old. They get their 60, 70, 80-year GlycanAge. Women who take HRT, they can remain very young, very old. So recently we had an 80-year-old woman who was 30-something.
Wow. I want to be her. I mean, I'm 58 and 20. So
yeah. And this is, this is not only HRT. One of my neighbors, actually my mother's neighbor, she's, I think, over 90. She's not taking hormones, but she's extremely fit, agile, and she's something like 50. So
that's the question I wanted to ask you. So that's a great example. I love that, right? Because I think what it speaks to is, it's, to your point, it's not one thing. I mean, yeah, the hormones are a great strategy, but if you're on the hormones and you're eating crap and you're exercising too much or too little and you're not sleeping and your lifestyle is horrible, the chances are that the GlycanAge is not going to reflect. It's not just, it's multifactorial here, but the hormones give you a really nice step up if it's the right thing for you.
No, we can see young women with regular hormone levels who can be very horrible because of other things. Yeah. So there are many factors which are important, and they can be very different in the different people.
Yeah.
So there could be even women for whom there will be no effect of hormones, or it will be very small, but it will be offset by, I don't know, bad diet or
all the other things. So let's just, there's one, okay, I know I've said one last thing, but there's one last thing, and then we're done. I will let you go. But before, well, actually, no, we'll say this at the end. At the end, I just want to talk about, just list the different factors that affect the rate of aging. But before we go, I have to ask you, because I have my GlycanAge test that tells me I'm 20, which is amazing. And then I've got my Horvath clock test that tells me still I'm almost 10 years younger than my chronological age, which is still really good. My telomere test is somewhere in that range, like my telomeres and DNA methylation kind of they're within a year of each other. Then there's my immune age, where they're looking at CD4, CD8, where I'm 32 or something. So what do we do with all these different tests? Like, do they overlap at all? Or, I mean, they're not conflicting exactly. They're just everything's a little bit different.
So first, biological age is, there's no definition of biological age.
Okay.
So we cannot say which is more accurate, because we don't know what is the real biological age. And each of these tests is measuring something else. Telomeres is a fantastic test at the cellular level, at the level of individual cell. But it depends which kind of tissue you look into yourself, you'll get a very different telomeres. So, and also depending on the composition of the blood cells at a given moment, which can change because of many reasons, it can change a lot. Epigenetics, original Steve clocks with 353 CpG sites was calibrated based on chronological age. Now, there are many different epigenetic tests, which each is looking at different CpG sites. And we cannot directly assume that they measure the same thing. We still have to discover what are they actually measuring. Immune age, GlycanAge, there are other tests. They all measure different things. Yeah. So I think what is important is that for each of these tests, we look at research. So which research was actually done with that test, and what is it predicting? So if I do a GlycanAge. And if I know that this test is predicting heart attack or stroke, I know that good GlycanAge will result in a lower risk of heart attack or stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, it will not tell us anything about the risk of developing, breast cancer.
Right.
Because it's not predictive of a breast cancer. So I think before we learn much more about biology, and it will take decades for us to understand a little bit more of biology,
sure,
we should measure as much as we can and try to interpret the numbers in the context of hard science, which has been done for that specific test. And there will be more different tests. Unfortunately, there will be a lot of marketing.
mm-hmm.
So like anything else, you make decision based on marketing and then not based on the real values. So if somebody wants to make a good decision, they have to do a little bit research to see what is actually doing what and what is just a marketing strategy. Because, for example, I always have fights with some commercial people because when we do a GlycanAge testing, we analyze each sample 3 times
Mm-hmm.
because we want to be as accurate as possible, because none of the lab tests is perfect. Everything has a measurement error.
Sure.
But we cannot have a measurement error of a couple of years if we expect that intervention that people do will have effect of a couple of years, because then our age would move randomly a couple of years. And I know, for example, when I look at my GlycanAge, it never changes more than a year in a couple of months, unless there is something horrible going on. So I know that at least the measurement we do is accurate, and I can focus on biology. If we would just measure everybody just once and say, okay, occasionally people get the wrong number,
yeah,
we would be making 3 times more money. But we are not doing this for money. We are doing this because we are trying to, at least I'm not, because I'm a scientist, I'm trying to understand biology. This is my drive. I want to learn, I want to understand. And I don't know what I'm answering actually. What was the question?
No, well, it was about where the different tests and where they overlap.
Yeah, so,
and I think your point is really good one. That is that you have to take each test within the context of what it's actually measuring, and they're all going to give you different pieces of information. And, I think one of the things that is so attractive about the GlycanAge is that we understand many of the, and I mean, not everything, but we know that finding that right nutrition plan for you, finding the sweet spot on exercise, doing, sleeping well, not more or less, whatever the case may be. One thing we didn't talk about was if stress impacts GlycanAge, which we can talk about. It does.
Stress is a very important factor. Yep.
So these are all very modifiable lifestyle interventions. And then hormone balance is the 5th one way or another. What's nice about it is that we know that these are things that can show you the results within a reasonable window of time. And that makes it useful at the end of the,
And one more thing, it's always, okay, many people do a lot of research and they manage themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But for many people, it's important to have a professional counselor, somebody helping them to understand what each of the tests does and helping them how to make a right decisions. Because, not everybody has time to read huge amount of papers. So it's very important to have a well-educated healthcare professionals who are actually knowing what they're doing. And we really have excellent experience with some of the clinics where people actually improve for decades in a couple of years. So it's I'm really kind of optimistic there will be more and more people actually benefiting from the test. And something what we are currently doing on the research end, we are trying to show that if you actually improve glycans, that you will decrease disease risk.
Yeah.
that you're actually postponing or even preventing diseases, because this is the key part. It's not important to live forever, but it is important to live healthy as long as possible.
Absolutely.
Because the moment we lose health, we lose the quality of life, and then things are not fun anymore.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's the key right now. And I think that's the focus, right? The focus is health span over lifespan. We know we can keep people alive for a really long time.
On a machine. Yeah.
Exactly. Or in a wheelchair or whatever. But, it's how you live that life that is really important. We were a little bit going to talk about COVID a tiny bit.
I'm happy to talk about COVID.
And I think the reason why I want to talk about it is I brought it up before the podcast. And what I think is really interesting is what you said about how, the rate of aging increases immediately. And there's a predictability, which we should talk about a bit as well, that's related to GlycanAge, but they do recover. So we're just going to talk about COVID-19 quickly. And I promise I will let you go.
Okay, so this is actually something what David Sinclair and I published in maybe April or May 2020 as an editorial in Aging, saying that we know that age is a risk factor, but the biological age is the real risk factor. So not being old, but being metabolically old.
Yeah.
And this is something what we managed to demonstrate for glycans. Yes, people who have GlycanAge, they have higher risk of severe COVID than people who have lower GlycanAge, even when you correct for chronological age. But interestingly, also, when you get COVID, so if the COVID was mild or asymptomatic, there were no changes in GlycanAge. So if you didn't notice COVID, the GlycanAge didn't change. If you had severe COVID, or even in particular in people who died, GlycanAge changed for a decade in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
So really, your body responds to this acute inflammation which COVID is causing by making IgG more pro-inflammatory. And I think this was also contributing to the severity of disease, because in COVID, the majority of the symptoms are not caused by the virus, but by the response of the immune system to the virus. So this pro-inflammatory drive, which was either caused by the virus or precipitated by the pre-existing condition that you were already pro-inflammatory and then the virus came in, it was an important factor. And we do a lot of research on that. We have thousands of samples of people with a severe, mild COVID, different type of vaccination and so on. And there will be a lot of research, and we will know much more in the years to come, because, research is slow. It takes time. You cannot do good research in a couple of months. And we have, I think it was over 200,000 papers which were published on COVID. And, when the scientific community publishes 200,000 paper, it's making a huge chaos, and then it's very hard to know what is real and what is not.
Yeah, because it's like this rush to the gate, right? And you have to tease out the good from the bad, and that's a really interesting point. So, all right. So to close, I think that I am finally going to let you go. So to close, I think it's important just to remind people those 5 things that they can really do. And I think what's important is that those 5 things are things that we know not only are going to improve some marker called your GlycanAge or your biological age, whatever we want to call it, but it's actually going to improve your quality of life. Like, you're going to feel better, you're going to live better, you're going to, function better.
So we all know these 5 magic things, which is diet, exercise, sleep, stress. But the thing is, it's very and hormones in the city. Yeah, that's the 5th thing. And but not all 5 of them are equally important for everybody. And it's very difficult to control everything. You cannot eat well and still have enough time to sleep and to exercise and not be under stress. Very few people are privileged to do something like, you have to be a British queen to live like that, and then you live forever like she does. And most of us, we have to live in the real world, and then we have to kind of trade-off things. And the GlycanAge can help you identify things which are the most important.
Right.
So you try and change, for example, my GlycanAge is horrible. So when I learned that my GlycanAge is horrible, the first thing I decided to do, okay, I'm going to sweat it out. So I was hiking 4 to 5 hours in the mountains every day, whole summer. I lost at least 10 kilos. I was perfectly fit. I felt good. I didn't feel so good because my legs were hurting all the time because I was hiking. My feet were hurting and so on. But my GlycanAge did not improve much because I was overtraining.
Yeah, too much of a good thing.
Yeah, and then with trying different things, I realized for me, okay, it's primarily diet, but for somebody else, it could be stress, it could be sleep. You know, there is a person out there who would be way better just by sleeping 1 hour more per day, or taking care of this sleep apnea.
Yeah.
Fixing that problem, or just reducing stress.
Yeah.
Stress is a horrible driver of inflammation. So maybe, you know, when you learn which one is actually working for you, then you can maybe relax on the other two and still cope with that, because you know nobody is going to fix everything. It's that's not realistic. So I think this is where is the value of this test, because maybe one day we'll be able to take a genetic test which will tell us, you know, you have to eat this food and you have to sleep so much and then you're fine. But for the moment, genetics does not tell us that. There's nobody who can interpret the genome in this way. So what we can do, we can try something and see whether it works.
Yeah, no, I do. And I do think that one of your comments you made earlier, which was really good, is getting outside guidance, like someone who's not in the situation, like whether it's a coach or a practitioner or a doctor, whoever it is, even a friend can sometimes look at your lifestyle and go, well, dude, have you noticed that X, Y, and Z that we don't see because we're in it and doing it ourselves? So getting that other perspective on our lifestyle and helping us to change it is sometimes, you know, can be the key. And again, also not thinking you have to be perfect, but making those small incremental changes, revisit your test, see what happened, and then pivot from there. So thank you for that. That was great. So
yeah, one more thing. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Now I want to say one more
Perfect.
thing.
I'm in.
This is important thing is, so some people get horrible GlycanAge and then they panic. That's a wrong reaction, because GlycanAge can change up to a decade before actually disease develops. So if you get a horrible GlycanAge, this means I got an early warning.
Yeah.
I can do something, I can fix it.
Yeah.
And there is still time.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, especially for men usually start to think about their health after the first heart attack or stroke.
Absolutely.
Then they decided to change. And then it's usually too late. Here, you can get shocked a little bit by horrible GlycanAge, but then there is still time to fix something before you get that heart attack.
Thank you for that.
Now I'm done.
No, and you know what? It's a point that you can't make often enough, right? I think that is the crux of it. This is an advanced warning system, hopefully for you, and you act on it and take the steps. So, Dr. Lauc, how do people find a GlycanAge? We have a 15% discount code for people if they decide to do their GlycanAge. It's Superhuman 2020. But where would they go to do that? And you have a great website. There's so much great information there.
It's glycanage.com.
Yeah, keep it simple.
It's simple. And from there, you can go everywhere. Or with some of the professionals who offer it. There are over 200 clinics globally who use GlycanAge in their practice.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that when you get your GlycanAge results, you're not left alone with them. You actually offer the services of different professionals, I think, to help people to interpret and make changes.
So consultation with a specialist is included in the test. So once you get the test, when you have the data, you have included, I think it's half an hour consultation, where you get directed to somebody who can then help you.
Yeah, which was super helpful for me. I mean, my GlycanAge was pretty good. But actually, you know what? Before we go, what's the lowest you've seen? How low can you go? Like at 20, I'm not going to go any lower than that.
You will not go lower than that because 20 is the minimum that we report.
Good.
Because what happens, actually kids, they have more pro-inflammatory IgG. So this 20 and between 18 and 20 years, this is the minimum of this inflammatory IgG. Okay. And if you go lower in age, actually kids are more pro-inflammatory. So if we would tell you that you are 17, it's actually worse than 20. This is as good as it gets. You cannot get. So
now there's just the pressure to keep it. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, tell me. Okay. You have one more thing?
So, if you move for a couple of years, it's not a problem. Just don't go in the 80s.
No, I don't have no plans to. Thank you so much.
Nice talking to you.
And you.